defund with Blue Lives Matter. I felt that was a very insightful article at the time that you didn't hear a lot of police officers talking about, and I appreciated that. The deaths of Black Americans have touched communities across our country at the hands of police, including locally with Manuel Ellis in Tacoma. Many of us will never understand the lived experience of Black Americans, especially those of us talking about it today. But calls for defund police are everywhere, with seemingly little understanding of what that movement means. Just hours ago, at the highest level in our country, it was called a poisonous ideology. Yet our communities are screaming loudly for reform. We're living in a world where it appears that in some places, police get to decide that some unarmed threats are extinguished immediately when other threats get the privilege of being diffused. When you think about what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, with the vigilante shooter, the police just ran right by him. Some say it seems that the gun doesn't always matter as much as who is holding the gun. Law enforcement is a hard and risky profession. And I'm very proud to know many officers, especially those in Tumwater, that are caring protectors of our community, whose actions reflect that commitment. Yet many in our communities feel that police no longer serve the people and are deterred from seeking assistance from them. I had a friend tell me recently that white kids are told to go to the police. Black kids are told to go anywhere else. I can assure, as I'm sure you can imagine, this conversation over the last 4 months, 4 years, 40 years and longer, raises a lot of questions for me, and others, including what does this movement mean? How will people stay safe, if police are defunded? Do police unions serve as a barrier to reform? And how do we, what do we do about qualified immunity? Can we do anything? And so these are some questions, and I'm hopeful that you can talk to us about some of these questions and some of the examples of successful movements to reform police systems, especially with your experience in Pierce County. And I know we only have a limited time, and I'm grateful that you're here with us today. So thank you again for that, and helping us answer some of these questions and provide your perspective on what it's like to police in America today. Thank you, Sheriff. I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Denise for the intro.
Hey, well, it's a tremendous, go ahead.
Go ahead, no, please.
Oh, okay. It's a tremendous honor to introduce Sheriff Paul Pastor. He is currently the sheriff of Pierce County, and that consists of 317 law enforcement officers, 301 correction officers, and 80 civilian personnel. Prior to taking this position, he served as the chief of department's operations bureau in charge of law enforcement. He was the undersheriff for Clark County, chief of police of Everett, and he was rank of inspector for the Pierce County Sheriff back from 1986 to 91. In the early 1980s, he was in charge of the state staff for the Criminal Justice Training Academy, and he also served as a loan executive program and Washington Crime Watch. He has his bachelor's from Pomona, as well as 2 master's degrees and a doctorate from Yale. He's lectured in several programs at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. He serves on the executive board for the FBI's National Executive Institute. He's a graduate of the FBI's National Executive Institute and a senior fellow in American Leadership Forum, and he's an honorary member of the Marine Corps League. He helped design the national model for procedures for policing mass civil disturbance after the WTO riots in Seattle. Many of you may recall those. And also consulted to the International Olympic Security Committee in Salt Lake in 2001. He served on state and national committees for emergency mobilization, ethics, homeland security, and trust in law enforcement and intelligence. And in 2004, he helped develop the National Sheriff's Association Weapons of Mass Destruction Training Program. He also has helped develop the Washington State law on police use of lethal force and the Northwest Law Enforcement Executive Command College. He recently led the effort to develop the Pierce County Criminal Justice Vision Plan. Quite a record, and I think going into this, if you hold your questions till the end, and please make sure you have your phones on or your Zoom on mute, it takes great pleasure in introducing someone that I had high admiration for quite a long time, Pierce County Sheriff Paul Pastor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, you can usually tell how important someone is by the amount of time it takes to introduce them. It's when once a year during a State of the Union address, a guy comes out in front of Congress and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." In Rome, this old guy shows up on a pointy hat on a balcony, and nobody says anything, and people begin bowing their heads and things. So I know what you're thinking. I'm another overeducated cop who has attention deficit disorder, can't hold a job, and so forth and so on. I've been doing this for about 40 years. I'm about to retire. I've had the privilege of working with 5 different agencies. I have the privilege of being a sheriff. We have a fairly large county. It's not a sleepy little county. Thurston County is not as well. We have big time, real time, prime time crime, and you see us on television too much. One caution I think I should, well, 2 cautions I need to present. Number one, the fact that you've invited chiefs and undersheriffs and other police management people, you realize if you disagree with what I'm telling you, they can't remove me. They can't throw me out. You can do that with a keyboard these days. And the second thing is, if you're one of my conservative friends or one of my liberal friends, I will probably upset you a little bit. And that's just the way I am. I'm going to tell you what I think on things. I want to speak about the issue of the trouble with policing in America. That is will involve a finger pointing in 2 directions, actually. Some of it at us and some of it outside of us. I want to talk about 3 themes. The first is the trouble with understanding what the police do. And there's a lot of trouble with that, I think. The trouble with police performance, yeah, we're not perfect. We make mistakes. And finally, the trouble with what I think of, if you know me, you've heard me say this before, with a lack of civic engagement, with the idea of obligations of citizenship in America, which we seem to have lost track of. I'm not talking about green card citizenship. I'm talking about community membership and engagement. So let's start with the first. What the heck is it that we do anyway? If you watch television, you probably think that we're in car chases, gunfights, and hostage situations, every 20 minutes. That's not the case. That's television. And I think this is a big issue with regard to law enforcement use of lethal force. You see, if you watch television or the movies, you see violence that is choreographed. It takes hours to practice, to make sure everybody has their moves right. Jackie Chan can beat up 18 guys with a folding chair, but that has taken 6 hours of choreography to make that go right. Those of you who have been in combat know that violence is not choreographed. It involves confusion and surprise and fear and anger and real physical risk. So we have in our heads, I think, as Americans, many of us, in fact, most of us, the idea that there's a choreography to violence, that it runs smoothly. If you haven't been there, you don't know that it does not run smoothly. It's not as seen on television. And I think there are no experts at combat. There are veterans and there are survivors. So it's not like television. What do we really do? Here's the abstract approach. We intervene in human crisis situations which people can't sort out on their own. That's most of what we do. We make difficult decisions in those situations because often we don't have much time. The situations can be chaotic, can be confusing, can be hard to sort out. People can be angry, people can be upset. Human crisis, we manage human crisis. We're not the only ones. A number of roles in our country manage human crisis. I'm thinking, first of all, of nurses, especially emergency room nurses, firefighters, doctors, social workers, priests, teachers. All of these people, all of these roles manage human crisis. Let me ask you this question. What do they do when they can't handle it? What do they call? And I'll give you a hint. It's not Ghostbusters. It's us. When they can't handle a situation, they call us. When we can't handle a situation, the only people we can call is more of us. We are the last on the human crisis food chain. So we get the cases that other people can't cope with often. We get the hardest cases to deal with. All of the other stopgaps aren't working. And here's the amazing part. Hold on to your chairs. The amazing part is we almost always get it right. We almost always get through a situation without people being hurt, without people being arrested, without fights, without injuries, without shootings. Thousands of times a day, probably hundreds of times a day. In fact, in this region, the ones you hear about are the ones that don't turn out right. And when you think about that, that's not because the news media are bad people or whatever. It's because what news is exceptional or unique. You don't have reporters standing in front of houses and saying, this house back here has not burned down today. Back to you, Bill. Or here I am in the flight path at SeaTac Airport, and that airliner is not crashing. Or this gas station has not burned down. This car has not gotten into a traffic accident. You get the idea. The exceptional is what we hear about. News which is uncommon. Nothing wrong with the news media. That's their job to cover. So the context of what we do is sometimes misunderstood. People need to know what we do and how we engage and what kind of outcomes it usually brings. And one of the troubles with policing in America is I don't think people get that. That doesn't mean we're perfect. I'll get to the next one here. We don't always get things right. And things don't always end well in the real world. They do on television, they don't in the real world. Sometimes it's because we screw up. We're capable of doing that. And sometimes we don't screw up. We try to do the right thing and it doesn't come out right because there are no guaranteed happy endings in the real world. So our job is to make decisions about managing people in crisis. They're important decisions. They need to be ethical decisions. You'll hear me use the word ethical several times. Ethics in policing is essential. It's complicated as hell, and it's essential because it's not in some calm office environment with the right lighting and so forth. It's where people are upset, angry, and so forth. We make decisions. We need to make ethical decisions. We need to make them sometimes with very little time and very little information. And we should be expected to have a rational and ethical outcome. We should expect that of ourselves. The public should expect it of us as well. It's not always possible. That's the real world. We can make mistakes, and when we make mistakes, we ought to be accountable and call ourselves out. There are two kinds of mistakes I tell our new hires about. First are mistakes of the head, and the second are mistakes of the heart. Mistakes of the heart are not romantic mistakes, okay? No romance novels here. I'm just not into that stuff in any way. So what's a mistake of the head? I forgot to sign the report. I left my handheld radio on top of the car and I heard a funny plastic clattering sound as I drove off. I still have the guy's driver's license from the last traffic stop I did. What I tell our new hires is if you may get discipline behind those, but if you don't do them too often and they're not too serious, you'll probably stay employed. If you make a mistake of the heart, if you do something that is wrong and you know it's wrong, if you lie, cheat, or steal, in our agencies, you will not stay employed. There's a slogan in my agency and it goes like this: if you lie, you die. You will be fired. You can't be untruthful. You can screw up and say, hey, I screwed up, I get it, I'll take my lumps, and you'll probably be disciplined. And if it isn't too serious, you'll probably stay on. But if you do something that you know is wrong and you do it anyway, not acceptable. If you lie, you die. I fire people who do that. Sometimes I arrest them. Sometimes I'd book them into jail, usually not me personally. I worked internal investigations for 4 years, so I did some of that personally, but I do that indirectly. So our job is fraught with moral complexity, decision making. And it's our job to sort it out. It can be hard and confusing, but we need to get it right. And to get it right, we have to recognize that we can be pulled off sides. In a morally complex job, we can get pulled off the track we should be on. Let me give you a quick example. Early in my career, I got a call with my partner to a location, to a house, and I found a 6-year-old girl who had been raped. And the owner of the house who committed the crime came out, locked eyes with me and said, she came on to me. I kind of went click as a young officer at that time, and I said, gee, I wonder if I could twist this guy's head off. My partner saw that and stepped between us. Do you see where I'm coming from? Raping a 6-year-old girl and then saying that she was inviting that. Those are the kind of moral tugs that our people get exposed to. Partner stepped in, said, you get the medics here and the detectives, I'll take care of this guy. Cuffed him and removed him from the front of me. Anybody can be pulled off sides in this business because it is a morally complex business which challenges our hearts and challenges our humanity. We can't let it happen, though. And what's the best way not to have it happen? I was in a virtual hearing here on Zoom before I joined you, and our county council, I think very concerned and trying to do the right thing, was talking about how much training do we have. And we have quite a bit of training, as does Lacey and Olympia and Tumwater and the Sheriff's Department. But training isn't an infinitely expandable thing. It takes time, it takes resources, it takes people away from the street. Is it important? Oh, yes, it's important. But I think we've gotten the idea in America that any problem in America can be solved by more police training. The fact is, we should concentrate on culture, not just training. We should concentrate on a moral layer of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And it's the job of the leaders in departments to lay down that culture, to reinforce that culture. Culture goes beyond what the procedures are in the book. So, and there's another issue that Mr. Smith had brought up. We have an unresolved racial divide in America, and it is not good for us. Our job is made harder by that unresolved racial divide. Police and fire are the only people who respond 24/7 into that racial divide, on call. And all of the anger and pain and difficulty and legacy of problems with the criminal justice system and education and business and so forth, we become the representatives of that. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That means we're the ones who enter the situation and can be interacted with. We make house calls. We respond to human crisis situations in those situations. Don't get me wrong. We don't always get that right. There are times when we widen that divide. The George Floyd case in Minneapolis is a prime example of widening the racial divide. We don't always do the right thing, and sometimes it's due to incompetence and bad tactics. That's true in Ferguson, Missouri. I think it may be partly true in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Some of us shake our heads when we see the videos and saying, what the hell was that guy thinking doing that? And let's be clear about something. There is institutionalized racism in America, and there is institutionalized racism in policing. Now, that's probably politically correct for me to say, or incorrect for me to say, right? But it's true. Racism is a species disease. It's not just a police disease. It's not just a white person's disease. It exists all around, as I say, in churches, in business, in government. That doesn't exonerate us, but it says it's a lot more widespread than us. Sometimes we become a convenient, well, look, they're out there all the time and they're getting the reactions. We mentioned earlier the question of Mr. Smith, Black Lives Matter. When people say Black Lives Matter to me, here's what I say. Oh, hell yes. No question about that. What is really being said is people are saying Black lives don't matter nearly enough in America. And that's absolutely right, in my opinion. They don't matter nearly enough. That's a legacy that is one of the weakest and worst parts about America. They don't matter enough in America. If Black lives overall don't do well, in my opinion, America doesn't do well. So there's a selfish reason, if you will, for people who aren't Black to be concerned about Black Lives Matter. We need to recognize that Black lives don't matter enough in the white community, sometimes in minority communities, and sometimes even in the Black community. Racism, institutional racism, is a species disease. It doesn't come with the badge. It's part of what we are, unfortunately, and it's something we need to address, and it's up to us to address it in policing.
That would be the bottleneck in deployment. But they...
If that's Sheriff Snaza, I think I see. It's one of two people named Snaza, I think. John, if you're with us, welcome. Remember, the only way you can get me off is to flick the switch there. From a police standpoint, I think we need to say, yes, we're part of the disease. We are not perfect, but let's stop pretending that cops are the only ones with the problem. Let's not be the convenient people to point at, if you will. There's another thing about what is expected of us, and that has to do with how we deal with issues like mental illness and homelessness and addiction. Too often in America, we have ignored those problems. We said, just let the cops handle it. They're out there anyway. Get it out of my neighborhood, get it off my porch, get it out of the front of my business, get it out of there. Just let the cops handle it is too popular approach. Sadly, this too often results in us playing whack-a-mole with the problem, chasing it from there to there and there and there and back. And that's silly. That's bad, short-sighted policy. It can lead to bad outcomes. It also puts us in a very hard situation. People with brain chemicals influenced by mental illness and by drugs are harder to police than other people. Again, the worst of the worst gets swept into our dustpan. Bad, short-sighted policy. We need to invest more in it. We need to work closely with social workers and mental health people. We have, I'm sure that you have it there as well. We have mental health professionals working side by side with our people. So we need to do more of that. And now if you're getting all warm and fuzzy and you're of a liberal bent, I'm going to throw a curveball at you. Here goes. I believe that criminal justice needs to stay involved in these areas. Will always be involved because they often involve some kind of minor crime, sometimes major crime, but mostly minor. And the public health approach to what they call harm reduction in drug abuse and mental illness sometimes goes too far. It enables people. It can enable people who want to live on the street or to commit slow motion suicide with drugs on our sidewalks, in our parks, behind our businesses. What is the morality of watching people commit slow motion suicide and saying, well, we should let them continue to do that? See, I told you I had upset both sides. I think there's a problem with that. We become comfortably complicit in letting people commit slow motion suicide. There's something wrong with that. There's something ethically wrong with that, I think. I believe there should be a partnership between treatment and law enforcement, and the partnership should be constructed in a way that protects dignity and rights. And there are times when we need to involuntarily and adjust the law to be able to involuntarily stop people from committing slow motion suicide. And we need to get over the idea of just let the cops handle it. So there's a third problem. We talk a lot about police responsibility. We need to talk more about citizen responsibility. Thank God we have individual rights and privileges in America, but the only way to make those benefits work is to have people shoulder responsibilities and burdens in citizenship. We have too many passive, disengaged, distracted, couch potato citizens, if you will. Citizens who think that citizenship is a spectator sport. It's sort of a consumerist approach to citizenship. How many of you are Costco members? Raise your virtual hand. I'm a Costco member. And it's pretty sweet, right? I'm a Costco member the same reason you're a Costco member. Why? Because I could get 430 cans of tuna fish shrink wrapped together for 23 cents a can. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good thing. There's sometimes, though, that we confuse America with a great big Costco store where we can get a whole lot of good stuff, rights and privileges and entitlements, and we can get it really cheap. But then we like to gripe about the lack of parking spaces at Costco and the lines at Costco and how long checkout takes. And we want the stuff, but we don't want to step forward to make the stuff more accessible to us. We have a whole lot of rights and privileges, and that's good. That's as it should be. But we resent the idea of cost increases. We resent the hell out of long lines. We hate to cooperate and share burdens. Tom Brokaw and others have pointed to people my parents' age, shows you how old I am. I think either Lewis or Clark was my training officer. I'm not sure which. One of those was, though. The Greatest Generation. They weren't perfect. They lived through the Depression. They fought World War II. They had an idea that they owed something, not just that they were entitled to something. When I say entitled, people think, he's talking about poor people. Yeah, sometimes that's true, but there are a lot of people who think they're entitled to their tax cuts, too. There's entitlement at all ranges of the social scale, rather. We want to shout hooray from America, for America. We want to celebrate what it provides us, but we don't want to shoulder the burdens. We want our rights and privileges with a minimum of fuss and bother. See, that's not citizenship. That's consumerism. Citizenship involves duty and obligation and sacrifice. It's something more than an economic exchange that maximizes convenience. Duty and obligation and sacrifice, what we owe one another and what we owe the nation as a whole. It doesn't work without standing up and pitching in and sharing the burdens. We continue to believe that hard work of citizenship is somehow below us. Then pretty soon the bottom falls out and the ceiling falls in. So, what is the trouble with policing in America? Trouble starts with people not understanding what we do and having strange expectations about what we can do in the real world. They don't know, they don't often know what our budgets are, what our rules of engagement are, what our challenges are, but they want to say they don't like what they see. The aerobic citizen, the non-couch potato citizen would stand up and say, tell me about this stuff. Educate me. Then I'll have an educated approach to maybe weighing in and saying, you guys don't have the only answers. And the second part is we don't have all the answers. We can make mistakes. Things can turn out wrong because we created the situation or we behaved in a situation to make them turn out wrong. They can also turn out wrong because we tried to do exactly the right thing. And in the real world, in human crisis and chaos, It doesn't always turn out right. We get the things that other people can't handle. If Uncle Joe can't handle it, or the nice lady across the street can't handle it, or the minister can't handle it, we get it. If there's something in an emergency room that they can't get close enough to administer some sleepy time drugs, we get the call. When people are scared or confused or can't handle it, we're the last on the food chain. The trouble partly extends to us being able to say, we didn't get it right, without people simply pummeling us, without them saying, well, if you didn't get it right, that's your responsibility, and it's the responsibility of citizens to try to change that. There is a racial divide in America. The idea that it is created by and maintained exclusively by law enforcement is bunk, and it shirks responsibility. That doesn't mean that we're perfect and we have no flaws, and there are parts of institutional racism that don't apply to us. But that means the people who are criticizing us, and I'm not talking about people of color, I'm talking about a lot of white people, are doing a holier than thou thing, because they like to sit in the bleachers and either cheer or boo and not be part of the solution. My people, 24 hours a day, 357 days a year, work to be part of the solution. They do it imperfectly. That's true. Citizenship. The idea can't be to get the right deal. The goal needs to be to do the right thing, even when that's difficult or inconvenient. We owe each other things. When I put on this badge, here it is. When I put on this badge, I owe you a tremendous amount. But what we seldom talk about, not enough, is what citizens owe law enforcement. I'm not talking about, you should bow down and say, oh, how wonderful, how heroic. I'm talking about looking me in the eye and saying, hi, what do you need to do your job right? Not looking at me in the eye and say, how cheaply can you possibly function? There's a lot to be done in this country. We need to be part of the solution in getting it done. And if we're going to be part of the solution, we need to link with the community. I'm not just talking about minority communities. I'm talking about everybody. If we decide to adopt a couch potato approach to citizenship, you can sure save time and talent and treasure by doing that. Sit on the couch and watch it on television. The trouble is, if that happens, we'll also lose our rights, privileges, and benefits. We all need to take up burdens. We do that regularly. We need to improve the way we do it. But if we're going to maintain what America is, and the best of America is, what America is, if we're going to live up to our promises in America, if we're going to increase our strength and equity, then people can't sit on the sidelines. Can't say, well, those terrible cops, look what they did again. They're a bunch of mindless brutes. That doesn't mean we don't call ourselves out when we do something wrong, and we do things wrong sometimes. But without knowing what it is we do, what the expectation should be, and without trying to get out of responsibility for being part of the solution, simply criticizing law enforcement won't cut it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. It probably took up too much time, but there you go.
Sheriff, thank you very much for that, very well-balanced perspective on the things that you do and affects our communities. I'm sure there's probably a million answers, and I would encourage people to raise your hands in the chat, and we can call on folks as those are coming up. But one, you kind of started to talk about not being a couch potato citizen, and you talk about sitting in the bleachers, cheering and booing, and I think that's the epitome of the privilege that some of us in this audience have, to be able to sit on the sidelines and watch what's happening. So if, for those folks that are motivated to work towards reform in a positive way, collaborate, be that collaborative citizen that you're talking about, what would be the first step that you would say, this is you should go in this direction. If you are curious, one, you want to know about what's happening in your own community, you know, what would you tell them to do?
And I think you can anticipate, and any of our other badge carriers online here can anticipate. Walk in and say, hi, I'd like to ask you some questions. I'd like to listen to a county or city council meeting. I'd like to wonder how many people you have on the street right now. Are you hearing this, John Snaza? How many miles you have to cover? What tactics you can use if you're out in East Rooster Poop, Pierce County, and there are 3 people who seem to want to go round and round with you, and there is 1 deputy. Get an idea of what we do, what rules apply to us or we apply to ourselves, get an idea of how we apply those rules, and get an idea of where we need to be going. So that's not totally uncritical. Don't say, I'm going to ask you and you tell me and you'll fill up my information bag and I'll be happy. Ask questions, become an informed citizen, and then get involved. And maybe you'll come up with some things we could do better than we're doing. It's not like as a citizen, you are totally ignorant and you don't know, but I am often surprised by what people don't know. Part of that's our fault. We don't educate people enough. And part of that is it's because most of us are too busy running as fast as we can with what we've got. Frankly, part of it is one of our spectator sports in America is lawsuits. So I had an attorney write to me and say, well, what if you do the right thing and people don't believe you're doing the right thing anyway? Isn't that your fault? And I said, well, you know, part of it may be, but think of your phrase about what do you do in court? If you got the law, you pound the law. You got the facts, you pound the facts. If you got the table, you pound the table. I submitted to him that part of the distrust is the kind of table pounding that the defense bar has done. So I'm not trying to lay it all off on it, blame the lawyers. I'm saying there's lots of things to go around. It's more complex than those brutal, ignorant, untrained cops.
Okay, last question from me, and then we'll open it up to other folks. Do you have, does your department have experience with policing alternatives, like bringing social workers into situations, or mental health advocates or things like that, and have they been successful?
We have 6 people we call co-responders. They don't ride with us, but they can be called to scenes. They are all mental health professionals. They are all on contract. They are wonderful. Our people love them. They like working with our people. I think they've seen how tricky the situations can be in the field as opposed to an office. Also, on top of that, I have 8 employees in the jail. Remember, we run the biggest hotel in town as well, as Sheriff Snaza does. Uh-oh, what was that? I'm sorry, I missed that. Apparently, Sheriff Snaza is in a canyon and having echo effects in the canyon. I bet he's weighing in saying he runs the biggest hotel in town as well. We have those people in jail to look after the mental health people there. And that has been guided wonderfully by our jail chief. There's John. And our jail chief is Patty Jackson. And she's also arranged to have the drug programs that will help people get off drugs in jail, not get dope sick, and we will get them into that program after they get off. I think there needs to be a closer link between therapeutic stuff for some people and criminal justice stuff. The trouble is people don't often want to get into the therapeutic stuff. Criminal justice is a lever to get them. So we have a drug court and the mental health court. Those kind of things should expand. And John, I missed your comment. I'm sorry.
I just apologize for that, Sheriff. I was on 2 Zoom meetings at one time and I got off one to get yours, so I apologize.
So you have a smarter and better looking sheriff in your county. And I hope all of you out there recognize the hierarchy with regard to sheriffs. There's the Lord, the archangels, and the sheriffs come next. And the sheriffs are currently suing the archangels because they don't like their relative position there. Other questions?
Well, it's good to see us too, Sheriff Snaza. Thanks for joining us today. I got a question from Carrie in our chat. Last couple of years, Sheriff Snaza has offered a lunch with the sheriff in our May Columbus Park Family Fun Fair Fishing Day for the raffle. It's not a question, it's more of a compliment. Such a great opportunity to hear about the sheriff's job. Thank you. We do have a question from Denise. It says, how can we in our daily lives assist law enforcement in the face of ongoing protests and riots in our communities? How can we make things better for you?
Okay. That's a pretty broad one. Again, I'd start with get educated. I worry that, and this is my son's line, so I'll attribute it to him. America politically is devolving into rival political fight clubs. And there's something wrong with that. So one thing we can do as citizens is to try to lower the temperature. We are now devolving into armed rival political fight clubs. There's something wrong with that. That's not what we should be doing. Who gets to referee those things usually? That's us. Let's have a better idea of how we conduct ourselves politically in America. Let's insist on that from all candidates and all sides. And let's say that's the standard we're going to set, and we are not going to accept other approaches to that. We are just not going to accept it, and that would be a good start, as well as getting informed. I think you got the impression, I'm not denying that there is a racial divide in America. It's the worst thing about our country. We will not be better or stronger until we can deal with it. If you expect that the police are the only ones to deal with it, you're shirking your citizenship responsibilities.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let me open it up to the floor for anybody else that may have any questions.
Anybody? Oh my God, John, we've intimidated all of them.
Looks like Denise might have another question. You're muted, Denise.
My sister was a state trooper for 25 years and just retired a couple of years ago. And one of the things she often talked about is that when she encountered someone on drugs, they had superhuman strength. And at times it was difficult to get them under control. And as I see some of the news reports, I can't help but empathize with the officers that these individuals, there's almost always some type of drug in their system, even in those unfortunate cases where people have died. And it just seems like the law enforcement is placed in a really difficult position. And this might be more of a statement unless you want to comment on it. Just the fact that when people are in superhuman strength and you folks encounter them, it's very difficult to get them under control, let alone manage a situation. And I think the public sometimes forgets that.
John, do you want to jump in?
I'll let you go with that one.
I don't think people have superhuman strength. Here's what I've noticed, and I'm going to make a confession to my colleague. He's out there and about more than I am. Mostly I drive a desk, but I attempt to do police work twice a year for sure. That's New Year's Eve and the 4th of July, right? Because those are high activity times. This last 4th of July, I dealt with a young lady who was out of control, probably on drugs. I'm not interested in sticking her in jail. I am interested in trying to get her some medical help, but I should be able to handle her. She weighs maybe, who knows, at least a third less than I do. But she didn't react to any simple pain compliance things, like twisting an arm or bending a wrist down. And so we had to sort of mob her and pick her up physically. And luckily there were 4 other deputies there who they had wanted to make sure I didn't mess anything up, probably. There were 4 other deputies there to help out. But the idea isn't, she didn't have superhuman strength, but things that should work on people that we're trying to do don't, if they don't register pain.
Yeah.
And the pain isn't to, make debilitating pain. The pain is just to get people's attention quickly so you can get them in custody. And we weren't really interested in an arrest. We were interested in taking her to the hospital, for goodness sake.
Thanks for that. Okay, I think we have time for one more question we have in the chat here. It says, what laws can we support that will allow for supporting the police? And what reforms in the law should be beneficial for the community and the police?
Those are good questions. Well, and John, I'll let you weigh in as well. But one of the interesting things is, and one of the difficulties in running an agency is every year we get a whole sack full of laws to put into effect. And we get that sack full, but we don't get the resources to enable them. And some of them, I think, are good ideas. I often agree with some of the unfunded mandates we get. The idea of having level 1 sex offenders check in more. The idea of creating a DNA database for convicted violent offenders makes good sense. If it is worth passing into law, it is worth funding. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And this goes back to just let the cops handle it. Let's make these even wise laws, but don't bother me with implementation. Let the cops handle it. John, what do you think?
Well, first off, Sheriff, it's hard to speak after you, but what I do say is that for us to learn the new laws and implement them, and then to expect our citizens to understand what those new laws are and to be able to follow it. And so, unfortunately, what we ask of people to support us, it's hard because you have to be more involved in your community than just expecting law enforcement to do law enforcement. And I, as an individual, I'll go to work, I'll do my job, and I'll go home and take care of my family. And to ask people to be more involved in what is going on in their community is sometimes a heavy task when we have busy lives.
Yeah.
And what I ask of people is that if you do want to support or understand more, kind of what the sheriff said before, going and asking questions of the sheriff or the sheriff's office about what are you looking at doing this, or how are you looking at doing that to get a better understanding. Because the only laws that we usually tend to want to know are the laws that affect us when we don't know they're going to affect us. And so the other part is that every year budget times come up. And when, however budgets look, if you have questions about why a sheriff asked for what they're asking for, it's okay to ask, to be inquisitive as to why we're spending money, because usually the sheriff's office has the largest budget in county government, but it has the least amount of discretionary spending to spend on training that we're mandated to do by law. And there are other law enforcement agencies on here that I see, and they're all mandated as well. And how do we stress upon the people who control our budgets why we need what we need? Yet we're asking the citizens to understand, yet a lot of our county commissioners don't even understand, and we're trying to educate them year round. So it's just one of those things that we as a law enforcement agency, I'll speak for Sheriff Thurston County, I need to better educate our county commissioners, and then get the message out to our citizens of what we're asking for and why we are. And it's all about communicating. And that's probably the biggest dysfunction that we have in law enforcement is the lack of communication.
What he said.
Yeah, you know, and it's unfortunate, but I think, you know, that lack of civic engagement, we see that at all levels of government.